When I headed out to Lesotho, a small country surrounded by South Africa, I took with me a 15-minute video of a high school mock trial competition put on by students in Washington, D.C. I had been invited by King Moshoeshoe II to implement a street law program in South Africa. When I looked at a map of Lesotho down in the southern hemisphere with a night sky includes the Southern Cross, I actually had no idea whether or not street law would work in Lesotho. It is a mostly rural country, and I wasn't sure how students would learn this interactive strategy. I was not encouraged either when I met for the first time with all the judges of the High Court, government ministers, teachers, lawyers, and the King and Queen. In fact, after I showed the video, the presiding judge of the High Court said to me that it would never work in Lesotho, and the only reason it was so successful in Washington, D.C. was because the students were Americans. Oh, great. What had I gotten myself in for? I had 6 months to adapt the national textbook from the United States to the laws and customs of Lesotho, to create a mock trial packet, and to conduct the first mock trial competition. I was partnered with a law professor from the National University of Lesotho and with a high school teacher. The good news was, however, that there were some lawyers in Lesotho who jumped at the idea of doing this program, and they volunteered to work with the different high schools. The trial itself was a simple theft trial, the theft of a typewriter from a local high school. It included elements that were reflective of the culture of Lesotho, in that students paid fees to go to high school, and that younger siblings looked up to their older siblings. High school students, during the actual competition, were allowed to wear the robes of the attorneys, and the actual high court judges presided. In a word, the mock trial event was fantastic. The Minister of Education was thrilled to see how students were motivated to learn to speak English and to speak on their feet and to understand what others were saying to them. And the Minister of Justice was particularly impressed to see how they could argue the law and make arguments, and how they demonstrated skills of thinking on their feet at the trial. So mock trials engage all types of students, motivating them to design arguments that are based on evidence. More importantly, mock trials are a proven civic education methodology using simulations of democratic processes in the classroom. Most students have seen television shows or movies or followed particularly sensational trials that appear in the media. So there's a built-in interest in trials. For teachers wondering what the hook of using a mock trial is to the classroom, they only need to look to their state civic standards, all of which require teaching about the Constitution. The right to a jury trial is embedded in both U.S. and state constitutions. So teachers do have that ready connection. Teachers also know that the solution to a bored classroom is to have students don a robe, take the part of lawyers and witnesses, and put on a trial. I walked into preparation classes with the attorneys down in Lesotho to see them getting students working on creating questions based on the evidence in order to support their arguments. There's great teamwork involved with mock trials. Each mock trial focuses on a issue that has at least two sides. Should the school district be liable for damages when a student dies at school who is using steroids at the school? Should a person be liable for opioid deaths because people use the drugs that they purchased from that individual? Then there are the historical trials, such as when President Truman ordered the bombing, the atomic bombing, or when Marcus Brutus decided to kill Julius Caesar. Even elementary school students love mock trials. Fairy tales and movies aimed at elementary school students are thrilling for the students. Was Cinderella guilty of burglary? Were the hyenas guilty of killing Scar? Costumes add to everyone's enjoyment. I still remember the first grade jurors in the hyenas being on trial for killing Scar, arguing vehemently during jury deliberations that no one could really see what was going on because of the smoke due to the fires. So facts matter, and how one uses those facts makes all the difference in the arguments. I've described mock trials that require a fair amount of participation, but it doesn't need to be that way. Mock trials can be conducted within a class period without advanced preparation. There's a continuum from a single class period to preparation and participation all the way up at the national mock trial competition. Regardless how much time is available, I would say to all teachers to begin with a scripted mock trial, where the parts read like a play, except for the jury deliberations. Roles can be divided up so there are multiple prosecutors, multiple defense attorneys, and even multiple juries reaching different verdicts. In this scripted version, students learn how evidence is marshaled to support their arguments and how evidence that doesn't support their arguments can be characterized. Role play mock trials follow, where all parts read like a play. The work of the attorney is to closely examine the evidence, statements, and exhibits. So for instance, if you've got medical records, it would be very important for the attorneys to examine the dates of the medical records, who was doing the testing, who was actually being tested, what their ages were, what the results of the tests were, and any other evidence in the medical records that could be supportive of their side or help them challenge the side of the others. Jurors are instructed to ignore any arguments that are not supported by the facts that are presented at trial. This admonition pushes students to work even harder to make sure that their arguments are supported by evidence. To focus a little bit more on how attorneys marshal their evidence for their arguments, they must create a theory of the case. Students at this point have been assigned to either one side or the other, prosecutor or defense, and they begin examining all the evidence from this perspective, reading through all the materials. I sometimes say a case theory is like, it's a logical story that explains the case of what really happened. I urge students to think of it as what they would say to a grandparent who lives in a different state if they wanted to explain what the case is about, making sure that it's consistent with what's in the packet and also consistent with what a jury with common sense would think about how things happen. So a great deal of analysis is required, and that helps put together their case with a framework of the theory and the law. This is the structure then that helps students put their evidence forward. There's always more evidence in a mock trial packet that can be presented within the time frames that are allocated for the trial. Therefore, lawyers have to be ruthless in making sure that the evidence they select to present actually furthers their cause and their arguments. And this provides the juice of the competition and doing justice for their side. After all the trials, students are required to write a reflection. And part of that reflection is to focus on what evidence was admitted, and how that supported the arguments that were made or didn't support the arguments that were made. So remember, teachers, you can start small, doing a scripted mock trial within one class period. If you decide to do more, move on to the role play trials. You should know that there are great free resources on the internet. Some of the ones I've mentioned are available for free on the website of the Washington State Courts in their Judges in the Classroom program. Both the Lion King is there and the Julius Caesar. I'll never forget doing that Julius Caesar mock trial with having students in their togas down at the district court, flapping around the courthouse in their togas. So after conducting mock trials for over 80 semesters, I can tell you that mock trials work and they teach important content and skills. So teachers, please consider using mock trials with your students. You'll be glad you did. Even if you don't have a formal mock trial program at your school, you can use mock trials in your classroom. You don't need to be an attorney to do this, although I will say law students, attorneys, judges are eager to come into classrooms and help teachers with mock trials. In these days of COVID-19, I feel as if I should say something about how mock trials might work, given those limitations. I also run youth courts, which is a program in which young people actually sentence their peers for misconduct, whether it's juvenile offenses, traffic, or school rule violations. We have gone to a Zoom format, and so that everyone gets their assignment. If you have a class that has both in-person and online participations of the students, you can have them do some preparation in the classroom and then actually conduct the trial over Zoom or whatever format you might use. So I wish you luck in bringing mock trials creatively to your classrooms. Thank you.